All that's good. Everything's good. Everybody's just, you do what you can do.
Right.
You guys shoot video, I write books, you talk to people, you just maybe hold meetings or whatever. You just do whatever you can do. But like I told you, then when time comes, punch out. Read something fun, go see a movie. The new book is The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, and the subtitle is How the New World Order, Man-Made Diseases, and Zombie Banks Are Destroying America. And they are. And most people would probably not disagree with that. Where I get disagreement is that there's so many people who still just have been discouraged from thinking in terms of conspiracy theory, because for so many years the corporate mass media has disparaged conspiracy theory. Oh, there's no conspiracy theory, it's just conspiracy, talk, But this is a plan, folks. It's a plan. It's been laid down for a good number of years, if not decades, and they're working the plan because they have to destroy the United States of America. Why? Because in the United States of America, we have a tradition of individual liberty and freedom. 2, we have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which gives us the legal basis for this individual liberty and freedom. And 3, we have guns. So we are still in a position where we can defend our individual liberty and freedom. Now, this is a big stumbling block for those who want to create a new world order. And the new world order, of course, would be a one world collectivism, where we're all together. But while I'm at it, is that better?
Sorry.
Better or worse?
Yeah, it's better. Better with it.
While we're at it, though, let me explain that these people who want their new world order, they really don't want a one world government, okay? Because one world government, then we'd all just be under the same system, and they couldn't keep us fighting with each other for maximum control and the friction that creates the profits and conflicts. If you want to know what the game plan is, I suggest you read a book that was written back in 1948 by a British Fabian socialist by the name of Eric Arthur Blair. And he was pretty well connected to the British aristocracy and to the royalty. And I think that he got a pretty good idea of what the game plan was. And of course, he didn't want to write under his own name, so he wrote under the pen name George Orwell. And of course, I'm speaking about the book 1984. And you can go back and read that, and you'll get the game plan. They want to divide the world into 3 economic blocks. In the book 1984, it was Oceania, Asiana, East Asiana. And any 2 of those would be fighting with each other at any particular time, and then they would reach a truce or a peace, and then they'd turn and fight with the other one, okay? And so this way they maintain the conflict and the tension that results in profits for the war industry and population control, because after all, we're in a war situation and we have to watch out for the enemy. And of course, in the book 1984, it was Goldman Emmanuel Goldman was the enemy. He was behind everything. Of course, they couldn't catch him. They didn't seem to know where he was. And nobody seemed to know what he was really up to, but he was behind everything. Well, today, in the real world, we've got the European Union, the soon-to-be North American Union, and by the way, there's already in existence the South American Union, already exists, and they will probably eventually merge that to where it'll just be the American Union, and then the future Asian Union. And the Asian Union is going to be very easy to create because most of the Asian nations are pyramid structured power systems anyway. In other words, a handful of people control the mass of the population. So all you got to do is buy those people up or put them on your board of directors, and then you'll have the Asian Union and you'll control all the Asian populations. The fly in the ointment, of course, is North America, because we have a tradition of freedom and liberty, and we have a constitution, and we have guns. And so that's why that they have to destroy the United States of America, and they're doing a pretty good job. How do you do that? Well, one of the easiest ways is to just throw open your borders and have absolutely no control over illegal immigration and just let anybody and everybody come in, and pretty soon the whole place is just overrun with conflicting cultures and philosophies and everything else. And this is why, and with people who have no concept or background or experience with true freedom and with a Republican form of government. What do I mean by a Republican form of government? Well, when's the last time you heard a national politician refer to the Republic? They just don't talk about the Republic anymore because we've lost the Republic. All they talk about now is democracy. We've got to save democracy. We've got to protect democracy. We've got to go overseas and bring democracy to other people. Well, democracy is ruled by the majority. Classic example of majority of democracy in action is a lynch mob. Hey, majority say hang him, so you hang him. That's not what we were given, and that's not what we want. We were given a democratic republic. And what's the difference? In a democratic republic, you have a system of checks and balances and laws. And in that situation, the accused has the right to legal representation, to face his accusers, to address the evidence that's being presented. He has to go through the legal procedure. And then if you find him guilty, and then say he gets an automatic appeal and that's turned down, then you can hang him, okay? That's the difference. And it's being taken away from us thanks to the Patriot Act and the Military Commissions Act and all this rushed through, largely unread legislation that's been forced off on us by a terrorist event, the attacks of 9/11, and the subsequent war on terrorism. And the problem is, what if 9/11 was a false flag operation, a phony operation, something contrived to make us think one thing when it was actually something else? That's what a false flag operation is. Classic example is when Hitler invaded Poland and started World War II, he didn't just wake up one morning and say, I think I'll attack Poland. No, the Nazis got some guys, dressed them up in Polish uniforms, even got a couple of concentration camp victims, put them in Polish uniforms, took them to a German radio station on the Polish border, shot the inmates, and then took over the radio station, got on there and said, we're Polish fighters and we're here to take over this German radio station. And Hitler announced to the world that they'd been attacked by the Poles and that they could not put up with this provocation, and he was going to respond, and he launched his panzer units into Poland and started World War II. That is a false flag operation. In fact, the Nazis got into power on a false flag operation. Hitler didn't just seize power. He was popularly elected by the German people, who in the 30s were among the most educated and cultured populations in the world. And so they freely elected this guy because they were in the midst of a terrible depression. Their economy had been trashed. And they were told, elect me and I'll straighten things out. And immediately upon taking order, within a month or so, their parliament building, the Reichstag, caught fire and was gutted by fire. And in that calmer, cooler, more gentle days, that was as big a shock to the German people as 9/11 was to the Americans in 2001. And Hitler said, well, give me the power and I'll take care of these terrorists that burned our building. And so they rushed through the Enabling Act, very similar to the Patriot Act. And that set them on the road to the Third Reich and to the Holocaust and everything that happened subsequently. And as French philosopher Santayana said, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And unfortunately, we seem to be repeating it. Well, I've been asked about ClimateGate, which of course is the information that suddenly came up to show that a lot of the data that the global warming argument is based on was either falsified or twisted or ignored. And I think what we see here is, again, is typical New World Order maneuvering. Are there changes taking place in the Earth environment? Yes. Is the Earth heating up? Possibly. But it's also, obviously, at certain points and in certain areas, cooling down. I think some of this is probably natural cyclic activity. The key point is that even if there is a slight global warming on the Earth, it's not limited to the Earth. The polar caps on Mars are diminishing. The ice on some of the moons of Jupiter are melting. And some of the outer planets, like Pluto, Uranus, they're actually becoming more luminescent, which means they're heating up. So whatever is happening solar system wide. It's not just the Earth. So much for the argument that it's our SUVs that's producing all the problem. And yet global warming and environmental changes are being used as the excuse to, again, curtail our liberties and to suck tax money out of the population. Cap and trade, what a laugh that is. All that is an opportunity for the polluters to continue polluting and buy their way out of it. It's just incredible. And it's going to get worse, because once the war on terrorism wears thin and people go, I don't know if I'm really going to go along with that anymore, then the next thing is going to be is, well, you have to give up your liberties and you have to give up more tax money because we have to save the planet. Do we need to be more protective of our resources on this planet? Animal life, plant life, yes. And we should all become more environmentally conscious. We should not just throw things out of the car, and we need to separate trash. We need to cut down on the use of plastics. Yes, we need to be more careful of our environment. But to go to the extent of giving up liberties in the name of something that's not real is wrong. The issue of chemtrails is really amazing, because since the government won't admit that they're doing it, and since the news media apparently has an embargo about talking about it, just like they have about 9/11, then most people just think it's not even happening. And this is really amazing to me, because unlike the Kennedy assassination, which just happened in one little place, and unless you happen to be looking at the right place, you didn't really understand what happened. Or 9/11, you saw the planes hit the building, but you don't really know, who's behind all that, who funded it, who gave the orders. All we know is what we're being told. So all of these are actually kind of mysteries. But with chemtrails, all you got to do is look up. There they are. And if you understand anything about aviation, then you understand that a contrail is a condensation trail. It's caused by the heat of the engines, whether piston or jet, at the cold upper atmosphere air, and it condenses into water vapor, and it streams off behind the plane and creates like a little cloud that goes back by a vapor trail. It goes back behind the plane, and then as it cools off, it evaporates back into air. It's no big deal, and it's not harmful to anybody. And yet a chemtrail, you'll see one of these high-flying giant jets spraying a trail, and we know they're spraying because they've done close-up photography to show that the spray is not coming out of the engines. It's coming out of the wingtips and leading edges where there's obviously a spray rail. It's an aerial spraying program, and they trail back off. In fact, I got to see one up close and personal coming back from California on a flight. And the pilot had just told us that we were at about 33,000 feet. And I looked out the window, and it was very strange because there was a circular cone just kind of right out the window, although it was a little bit below, so it must have been at about 30,000 feet. And as I watched it, it was white, and it was like a tube, very clearly defined, and I knew exactly what it was. It was a chemtrail. But before I could even get the attention of the stewardess to say, hey, what do you think about that? It began to dissipate, spread out, didn't go away, didn't evaporate, but it spread out into just a white cloud, mist, fog type thing, and pretty soon it was just a white fog out beside the airplane. And at that point I didn't even bother trying to tell anybody anything, because they look out there, they just see this white fog-like stuff, and you couldn't prove that was anything. But these are not normal condensation trails, and they're just happening, and yet they will not even talk about it. Although interestingly enough, a few years back on one of the Dallas TV stations, at the early news at 5 o'clock, the weatherman, who was not the usual weatherman, some young guy who was a substitute weatherman, said, in answer to all you people who have been calling in and asking about those trails across the skies, I've been told to tell you that the Air Force is conducting a spraying experiment, but they assure us that there's no danger or hazard to the public about this. And I just went, whoa, wait a minute, they just admitted that they're really doing it. So, of course, I wasn't prepared to tape that or anything, but I was come the 10 o'clock news. Had my, recorder all set up. I was going to record it. Well, the 10 o'clock news came. The regular weatherman was back, and there was not a word about the chemical spraying in the atmosphere. And that, my friends, is what's going on. It's called chemtrails. And we know what is involved because there have been people who've gone up and taken air samples in the wake of these airplanes. We know that they're spraying barium, aluminum oxide, pathogens, which is kind of scary. And of course you got some JP4 up there, which is just jet fuel. I think that's probably just the carrying agent. And so we know what's in there, heavy metals. Now, there's already been shown to be a link between aluminum and Alzheimer's, and they're spraying aluminum into the air that we have to breathe, and that accumulates in your system. It's cumulative, and so this is really worrisome. Now, what's it all about? Well, since they won't admit that it's even happening, then nobody can tell you precisely what it's all about. But one of the theories that I think has some traction is that they are, because certain scientists, Dr. Edward Teller for one, said that to repair ozone holes and thin ozone layers in our atmosphere, we should cover the upper atmosphere with heavy metal particles, which will then form a heat shield and reflect ultraviolet rays and thus hold down global warming. And I think they feel like they must do this because if the warming trends and the earth changes and the environmental changes continue, and we have more drought in California with the fires and the mudslides, we have more hurricanes, we have more tsunamis, we have more flooding in the Mississippi Valley, more tornadoes, the insurance industry could go broke. And if the insurance industry was to go belly up, it would probably take the whole U.S. economy with it. If the U.S. economy goes, it could drag the Western economy of the world down with it, and that's provocation enough to take action to try to prevent that, even though it could be detrimental to the health of the population. And that's why they are not going to say anything about it. Because if they admitted that they're spraying heavy metals into the atmosphere, the environmentalist groups would go nuts. But John Holdren, who's the science advisor to President Obama, actually mentioned as a possibility that they might spray pollutants in the upper atmosphere to hold down global warming. So they've actually mentioned that as a very real possibility. And of course, the very time he mentioned that, which was back in early 2009, the environmentalists jumped all over him and said, well, I don't know, that doesn't sound very safe, doesn't sound very helpful, and you need to study that. So in other words, they already started raising criticism just on the suggestion that they might be thinking about doing that. So you can imagine what they do if it was admitted that they are actually doing it. I've been asked you about the left-right paradigm, but let's solidify that into Democrat-Republican, okay? Because today the Republicans are viewed as the conservatives, Democrats are viewed as the liberals. Folks, this is all just smoke and mirrors to keep us divided and conquered, okay? Like most people, I'm probably would be considered liberal on some issues. On others, I'm quite conservative. And I don't like to be pigeonholed or stereotyped. I don't think anybody else does either. And besides that, it's all meaningless. I would point to the story of George Green. George Green, back in the 70s, was a very prominent Washington fundraiser, lobbyist type. And he tells the story of being flown to Aspen, Colorado, where he met with then head of the Federal Reserve System, Paul Volcker, and Henry Kissinger. And they were trying to recruit George Green to become the campaign finance manager for the Jimmy Carter presidential campaign. And he said, well, wait a minute, you know, you guys are big Republicans and you're asking me to raise campaign funds for this Democrat. And he said, Paul Volcker said, son, we control them both. And that, my friends, is the truth. They're both just two sides of the same wealthy elite coin. So forget liberal Democrat, forget Republican Democrat, forget liberal conservative, okay? Just forget all that. Consider the person and don't listen to what any politician says to you, because you can always tell if a politician is lying to you if their mouth is moving. And I don't say that to be derogatory totally. They have to. A person cannot tell the truth and get elected to public office. They have to do the spin, the shenanigans, and dissembling, or they would not be elected. And so you have to not listen to anything a politician says. You have to watch what they do. This is what finally caught up with George W. Bush. He said all the right things. Less government, you know, no foreign adventurism, you know, school for all kids, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wonderful stuff. You know, sounded great. And yet he didn't do any of it. He pushed National Socialism on us. And that's why by 2008, we were ready for something else. And here comes Obama. Oh, he said all the right things. And everybody put their money on him. And all he did was out-Bush Bush once he got in office. Came in as a peace candidate. And here it is, 2010, we're still fighting in Afghanistan, we're still fighting in Iraq. You know, nothing's changed. So don't listen to politicians, watch what they do. And if you like what they do, then vote them back in. If you don't like what they do, then vote them out. That's not a revolutionary idea. That's the way it's supposed to work. I've been asked if the election of 2012 might see the rise of a third party. Unfortunately, what I see is that the election of 2012 is going to see the rise, the true rise of the Fourth Reich. Okay? Because after 3 more years of the collectivism of Barack Obama with his Marxist socialist background, the economy of this country is going to be so depressed, the people are going to be so angry, and the infrastructure is going to be so deteriorated that they're going to look for some other solution, and the controllers of the mass media will then put up some candidate just like Barack Obama. In 2006, most people had never even heard of him, and by 2008 he was the man of the hour. We haven't probably heard of this person yet, but by 2012 he's going to be somebody on the scene that says, give me the power and I'll straighten all this out. And everybody's going to stampede right there to him, and we're going to move right on into even a tighter, more totalitarian, centralized government. That's what I see, unless people wake up. And then maybe we could go for a third-party candidate, for someone who represents the best interest of the public of this country and not the special interest.
Do you think politics are pointless?
Are politics pointless?
Like somebody might get involved with, you know, X campaign with whatever candidate they think. They might be a Ron Paul fan, or just a libertarian, or a constitutional party.
All right, well, first let's say that, let's define politics. If we all decide that we want a new highway, and then we argue about how to get the money to pay for the new highway, that's politics. That's normal politics, and that's the normal interaction of, you know, public discourse to reach solutions for problems. And that's politics, and that's not a bad thing, okay? But when you talk about unwarranted invasions of other countries based on lies and deceit, when you talk about false flag operations that kill 3,000 people, you're not talking about politics. You're talking about crimes against humanity, and you're talking about criminal acts. And I always hear, well, we don't want to talk about politics. You know, well, I'm sorry, folks. It's time to start talking about criminal acts, okay? Because it's all hurting us, and it's hurting all of us. And then the question is, well, then do you want to become involved in politics? Well, that's up to you, okay? If you want to go and work for the Democrats, if you want to go work for the Republicans, if you want to work for the Libertarians, if you want to go attend the teabag meetings, you know, that's fine. Have at it. But just understand that both the Democrats and Republicans, and by the time any independent party gets to the point of really being an effective force, it's going to be co-opted and it's going to be bought off by the big money interest.
So what's the most effective way of waking people up or getting this information out there, in your opinion?
Well, I'm just an old Texas reporter, so I'm not in a position to tell anybody to do anything. I have trouble enough being responsible for myself. I sure don't want to be responsible for other people. But so all I can tell you is just do whatever you think needs to be done and whatever you think you can do. I write books. Other people do videos. Other people march and demonstrate. Other people go out and become activists. Other people publish pamphlets and newsletters. Other people blog on the internet. Do whatever you can do, but for God's sakes, do something, because sitting around waiting for somebody else to do something is the big part of the problem. For years I've heard people say, oh well, let Washington take care of it. Well folks, they've taken care of it, and I don't think we're really happy with what they've done. So we're going to have to take back the power to ourselves, and we're going to have to start acting individually in whatever way we can to see that things turn to the betterment of the public and the people of this country. And when I say the people, we have to think about what's good for everybody. This is part of the problem in Congress. Everybody's up there, you know, feathering their own nest and looking out for their own little pork projects. And we have to get away from that. We've got to start thinking what's good for everybody. The health care thing is a real classic example. It's obvious that the healthcare system in this country is just screwed, you know. There's no other way to describe it. It just can't go on this way. And yet, a total socialized government-run program. I mean, my God, they can't even make the post office run in the black. And we want to run health care? Give me a break. There's got to be a way of making it work. They make it work in other countries. We can make it work here. And by the way, if you think, well, what we have is not that bad, just check the statistics. Infant mortality rate in the United States is below that of Jordan, Estonia, Rwanda. Give me a break. If our healthcare system is so great, how come we don't have a healthier population? So we need to start rethinking a lot of things, and we need to start taking responsibility back on ourselves. And you need to get out and do whatever the work is to get something done. And if you don't like, and if you've come to understand what I understand, which is party politics is actually getting in the way, it's not really leading us into any kind of real solutions, then do something about it. Run for office yourself. Okay? Yeah, you can't run for president, but you can run for the school board. You can run for county commissioner. You can run for city council. And get in there and start doing the work. And when the feds come and say, oh, well, you've got to do this, say, no, we don't. We're going to do it this way because this is in the best interest of the public. Just take your country back. Exercise the 10th Amendment. If you don't know what that is, go check it out. 10th Amendment says any power is not specifically delegated to the federal government, and by the way, that's only 2. Constitution only gives the federal government 2 powers. Coin and regulate money, provide for the common defense. And past that says if it's not specifically delegated to the federal government, then it resides with the states and the people. Okay? Make it work, folks. All right?
Was there anybody that you wanted for governor in Texas more than Perry, or did you like Perry?
I like Deborah Medina.
Yeah.
And they blindsided her with 9/11. And all she did was make a very reasonable statement, said something along the lines of, well, there's a lot of questions about that, and maybe we should take another look at it, something like that. And immediately they're saying, well, she says the Bush administration behind 9/11. She never said that. It's the same, tactics that they use. They put words in people's mouth, and all they do is look for some gaffe, and then they run it all over. What was it? One of the candidates, he cried, and another one coughed, and and it's like, oh, well, they're a nut. Come on, folks. You can't let the media lead you around by the nose. And the polls show nobody trusts the media anymore. And I don't know why anybody trusts the government anymore. If the federal government of the United States was an individual, none of us would have anything to do with him, because he is a proven liar. Now you come to me and you lie to me one time, I'm a pretty forgiving person. And I might say, well, gee, he or she, they were mistaken. Okay. Well, you come lie to me twice, now you got me on guard. I don't know about this guy. I've caught him in 2 lies, okay? You come lie to me 3 times, I'm not going to have anything to do with you. And yet the government has lied. No new taxes. Lied at the end of the tunnel. Blah, blah, blah. Lone nut assassin. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Lied. And yet we still listen to them. It's ridiculous. Let's just say no, forget it. Go tell it to somebody else that cares.
Do you feel that the USA has a more communist feel to it, or a more fascist feel to it now?
All right, more communist or more fascist? You're talking about the same animal.
It's true.
It's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing.
And if you'll go back, if you read my books, Rule by Secrecy and Rise of the Fourth Reich, and the new one, you find out it's all the same bunch.
It's all the same thing. Total control.
Total same thing. We sent more money to the Bolsheviks at the time of the Russian Revolution than we did to the Kerensky government, the White Russians. So in other words, Wall Street capitalists created communism. And I think the game plan at that time, this was right at the time of World War I, was to create a socialist East and a capitalist West, and then play each other off against each other, which they finally got for 70 years, called the Cold War. But what happened is that communism got out of control. they created the Internationale, and they began to bring the socialist and communist ideas. There were strong communist parties in Italy and France and even in the United States. And all of a sudden it's like, oops, wait a minute. It looked like communism was going to go worldwide. The old threat, right? International communism, going to go worldwide.
McCarthyism.
Yeah. And, whoa, they didn't want that, because then they can't play off the countries against each other for profit and control. So what they do? They reached into the only country that was in a position to stop the spread of Russian communism was Germany and its military. So they go in and they find a German army intelligence agent, and they send him in to infiltrate this little fledgling party called the German Workers' Party. And he came back and said, well, you're going to like these guys. Said they want a strong Germany, and they want to repudiate the Versailles Treaty, and they want to rebuild our military, and they want to, you know, do this and that and the other thing. They want a strong central government. So they said, here we go. So they created National Socialism in Germany. And of course that intelligence agent was Adolf Hitler, who was reporting back to the German military leaders and who were members of the Thule Society, made up of the aristocrats and the industrialists and the wealthy people. So they created Hitler, same bunch. The largest lender of money to the Nazi government was National City Bank, which is now Citicorp. And its CEO was John J. McCloy. And then after the war, after they decided, oops, National Socialism, they overran Europe and were threatening Britain and threatening Russia. And it's, oops, wait a minute, we've created another Frankenstein monster. So we got to put a stop to this. Winston Churchill said, we've got to destroy Germany. I don't care if a Jesuit priest is in charge. So in other words, it wasn't really Hitler and the Nazis they didn't like. They didn't want Germany heading the economic order, because that was their purview. Wall Street, the City of London, the Anglo-American financial elite, that's who was in charge, and they wanted to stay in charge. So we fought World War II to put a stop to Hitler and the Nazis. And then what happened? They put John J. McCloy, the guy, one of the key guys that had helped create Nazism in Germany, they put him as the High Commissioner of Germany after the war, and he brought all the Nazis in over here under paperclip, and they rolled them in right over here, and they began to create National Socialism in the United States. Of course, they couldn't call it that, so they started off, it was anti-communism, okay, and then they finally came up with the term neoconservative, a neocon, but it was nothing more than a National Socialist. And socialism is the name of the game because socialism sounds great, which is the government controls the means of production and distribution, etc. Okay, and everybody gets a share, and that all sounds good. But for any social program requires central administration. In other words, central authority. And the rich, wealthy elite know that anytime you create a system with a central authority, they got the wealth and the power to buy up the central authority. And then they're in control. And that's the name of the game.
The same thing you already have now.
Exactly. And that's what they're pushing us into right now. And they have to destroy us because we, even though they wanted these leftists out here argue that, oh, it was all created by white men in wigs, and it was women in slavery. And, yeah, all that's true. And it was not the most perfect system in the whole world, but nevertheless they did create a system of checks and balances, elected officials, so that the power actually began with the people and then drifted up into the leadership, rather than the rest of the history of the world where it was in the top leadership and only drifted down to the public.
And there was a way of changing it.
And a way of changing it.
You could amend it how the people
non-violently.
Yes, the people could amend it how they wanted.
Exactly. Now we gave it up. Right. Okay? You can't really fault the wealthy elite for taking control of it all, because we gave it up. We let them go, and we let them take it.
Our parents,
yeah.
We just let them, they got busy with their jobs,
yep.
their school, their kids, and they complained about Washington. They saw what was going on, read the newspapers, but didn't get involved.
But they didn't do anything.
Didn't do anything
Let
about
Washington take care of
it.
it.
Just let them take care of it. And now it's at a crisis point.
And now it's a real question of whether or not we can reclaim that
That's what
power.
I was wondering what you think.
Yeah.
Ultimately, do you think we win?
Well, let me put it this way: we can, simply because there's more of us than there are of them.
Yeah.
That's why I was trying to make the point up there, which I think went right over everybody's head, which is, we've got to, number one, educate yourself as to what's really going on, and then educate everybody else. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because, hey, just the sheer knowingness, will change everything. If everybody understands that the pharmaceutical corporations are out of control and that they're not there for our health, they're there to kill us, if they understand that the major media is under the total control of 5 corporations and they're not telling us the truth, then they'll quit listening to them, quit advertising with them, and it'll all change. And they find out Congress is totally bought off or intimidated, then they'll get rid of them.
Turn off who wants to marry a millionaire, American Idol. Stop being concerned about the NFL stats.
Exactly.
And really pay attention to what's going on in your world.
Exactly.
We're so entertained, but we have so much. There's so much knowledge with the internet and mass media, yet we have no wisdom.
And you're absolutely right. But what do you think the true odds are that would happen? It ain't gonna happen.
It's not.
As long as people got something to eat, bread and circuses. And I was talking about that on Jeff Rent's show one night, and I was appalled to find that even Jeff Rent didn't even know what I was talking about bread and circuses. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yes.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Not
Fat
really.
And happy, basically?
Basically, but see, that goes back to the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
The Romans built the huge Colosseums, and on the weekends, all the poor people in Rome would go to the Colosseum, and they go around throw free bread. So they got bread, and then they got the circus, and the gladiators would fight, and they'd throw Christians to the lions, and they probably had stand-up comics, and God knows what all, and it was entertainment. So they were distracted, and they got free bread.
Right.
And they lasted 1,000 years. Nobody said anything because everybody, I got something to eat, and let's go down and see the gladiators, and that was okay. So today it's welfare and television, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I heard Nancy Pelosi say, of course she's in our district, for mine and Frank's, she was saying that it's okay for you to go quit your job if you always wanted to be a musician. Go ahead and play guitar. Don't worry about your health care benefits because now it's taken care of.
Well, wait a minute. Who's going to pay for all that?
Apparently Nancy Pelosi's going to pay for it all.
She ain't going to pay for it. She's already costing us thousands of dollars. She couldn't settle for the little airplane they gave her. She wanted that $65,000 one-way trip plane so she could carry all her friends around. She's top of the list.
There's a lot of thought that the space weapons were put in place to eventually usher in the final global government by staging an event that all of humanity has to join together and form the one world government, because here's our threat, and it's extraterrestrial.
Okay. I go to some conferences, Kennedy assassination, 9/11, government conspiracies, and they always pull me aside and say, whatever you do, don't talk about UFOs. Okay, as if that's some kind of taboo subject because it's so far out, it's so woo-woo that they don't even want to consider it. Well, let me tell you, folks, if you just dismiss the subject of UFOs out of hand, you will never, ever figure out what's truly happening in the world because you've just tossed out a big piece of the puzzle. Okay? Now, what it is, who they are, where they come from, where they want, I don't know. Even though I wrote a book back in the 90s called Alien Agenda, which has now become the top-selling nonfiction book on UFOs in the world. It has been translated into more than a dozen languages, and it is not a fictional account. It doesn't give somebody's account of being taken up in a craft. It is a journalistic overview of what we know about the extraterrestrial issue going all the way back through history and bringing it right on up until today. And trust me, there is a reality there. General Nathan Twining, back in 1947, he was head of the Air Force Material Air Command, and he wrote a memo saying that it's not fictitious or hallucinogenic, they are real, they represent a reality, and they do. All right, now that brings up the question, well then who are they and what do they want? And are they good and are they bad? And the only analogy I can tell you is that the next time you're outside, look up and you see an airliner going over, okay? Ask yourself, well now I know there's people in that airliner, are they good or are they bad? You can't answer a question like that because there's different people in that airliner, and some of them are good, some of them might not be so good. And you can't make a generalization like that. And the same thing holds true for extraterrestrial life. I think the evidence that there is extraterrestrial life, and I think the evidence that they are in ways interacting with us and have been all throughout our history, is pretty overwhelming. But since they're not here and they're not on TV talking to us and they haven't landed and said live long and prosper, you know, we don't know, and we have to speculate on what's going on. But I think it's wrong to try to generalize and say, oh well, they're evil and bad and they're demons and they're here to kill us. And just as badly as it's wrong to say, oh, they're our space brothers and they're here to save us. No, that ain't gonna happen either. But I will say this, there's no reason to get panicky about it, because if there are extraterrestrials and they are visiting the Earth and their game plan is to destroy our cities and eat us or whatever, along the lines of Independence Day movie, then they certainly would have done it long before now, right? I mean, the first big UFO thing that came up in recent times was the Roswell crash of 1947. All right, now think about it, folks. 1947, think about a 1947 car. It's an old antique classic. And at that point, if they wanted to invade us, all we had to face them with was propeller-driven airplanes and machine guns. Now we've got supersonic jets and space platforms and laser weaponry and particle beams and God knows what all. In fact, what was Star Wars all about anyway? I spoke to people who worked on the Star Wars program, and they said the real oddity was, because we're told that the Star Wars program was to put these satellites in orbit that were going to monitor and see if the old evil empire of the Soviet Union was launching nuclear missiles at us, and maybe they could stop those missiles before they struck the United States. But the people who worked for Star Wars said, interestingly enough, it seems that they were really all pointing outward rather than pointing inward. So, are we in some kind of a Cold War with extraterrestrials? I don't know, but there's some stuff going on that we're not being told about. And that may be really one of my big bones of contention, is that the government today treats us as if we're a bunch of idiot children, okay? And unfortunately, maybe we are. But I don't like to think so. And I would like to think that if we were given the full facts of a situation, I think we could make some reasonable, rational, and mature decisions about things, and I'm tired of the secrecy. I served in the U.S. Army myself. In fact, I was in Army intelligence, and there was some things that were secret. So I certainly understand that there are certain national security defense secrets, disposition of your troops, where your defense systems are, how they operate. There's things that require some secrecy, but secrecy has gotten totally out of hand. Today the government classifies things as secret when they don't even need to, and a lot of times simply to cover up their own malfeasance and mistakes. And it's wrong, and we need to correct this. There needs to be more transparency in government. And of course, President Obama promised that, and instead he's followed right down the same path as George W. Bush. And we need to put a stop to that.